Well, you're all very welcome to the first episode of Employee 360, where we talk about how companies today really are helping their employees in ways that would have been unheard of 20, 30 years ago, certainly, and how the employees' welfare, just outside of work matters, is so important in terms of not only producing at work, but having a healthier, happier person and seeing the employee as an individual. And I'm delighted today because every week we'll have different guests on. We'll have heads of HR and learning and development to give their perspective. And such wonderful companies out there that are doing really great stuff for their employees. And the purpose is for us all to, I suppose, learn and from each other and grow in that kind of field. Today we've got Eoin McCoy. He's the Global Head of Learning and Development at Emerald Contact Centre. So I'll be talking to Eoin in a few minutes and really looking forward to hearing what the guys at Emerald Contact Centre are up to. And then Gillian Harford, she's the Country Executive at 30% Club Ireland. So you're all very welcome. Gillian, looking forward to chatting to you in a few minutes. But as always, I'll have Mark Corkery of Premier Life with me. And Mark, at the top of every program, we intend to look at one particular aspect of Employee 360, if you like, and spread the gospel on it. But your interest and your passion in this, and you work with a lot of companies, is actually from the financial side, if you like, and financial well-being and all of that. And I know we'll be talking to Gillian and Eoin about maybe other aspects that might be important, stress relief and all of that. But tell us from your perspective, what difference does it make to have working environments that help their employees in a fully rounded way?
Thanks very much, Brendan. And I'd like to welcome everybody to the podcast as well. It's great to have you all here. So for me, since COVID has started, I think the working environment has changed both physically and emotionally for employees. And I believe this new working environment is here to stay for the most part. So I think providing skills like emotional, motivational, relationship and financial skills are all areas that can increase an employee's ability to cope with the new working environment going forward. This should support both their whole life and their working life, which should lead to better performance at work. And finally, I think this approach benefits society as a whole, as the promotion of better mental, physical and financial health can only help to take pressure off our government services in these areas.
Okay. Yeah, it makes a big difference. I think, no doubt about it, especially when you're in a big organization, that you can get a kind of a human touch of HR. Your side of it, we touched on, Mark, is financial health, if you like. And I know you work with a lot of companies on that. It's a kind of a sensitive area. And I know myself from dealings with big companies, it's people don't want to talk about personally, maybe about their finances or that, but it does put stress on people. So how do you find dealing with that side of it then?
Okay, so again, Brendan, I've been advising employees for the last, say, 30 years in relation to their financial affairs. And generally, when I meet them, it's usually the first time they've talked about their financial wellness. And unfortunately, most people only engage with a financial planner during a significant life event, say, for instance, their first mortgage, their first child, retirement, or even worse still, maybe the death of a spouse or a partner. So generally, after most financial planning meetings with employees, I always hear that general comment: if I'd known things earlier, I would have looked after my financial affairs differently. So to counter that, at Premier Life, we set out to create a financial wellness community that helps employees to be educated, engaged, and coach with their financial wellness throughout their lives, and not just on key life events.
Okay. And Premier Life itself, it's what is it? Is it kind of an educational tool then for employees?
Exactly. It's both an education platform where you have educational courses, and there's a community where people can actually talk on it, and there's actually coaching programs. So we feel those three aspects together should encourage employees to get more involved in their financial wellness.
Okay. And Generally, Mark, how do you find the feedback from companies on that? Are they more open these days to say, listen, yes, this is a tool that our employees need to look at in terms of it is causing them stress and all of that, or is there still the sensitive issue with it, do you think?
Yeah, I think so. Look, the whole area of wellness, be it mental wellness or fitness or financial wellness, they're all new areas. And I think, of course, with COVID, they become to the forefront. Finances, generally, people don't like talking about them or don't like engaging with them. And nobody wants to ask a silly question about their finances, but there's no silly questions. There's only questions where you learn. So I feel that by doing something like we have done, say, in Premier Life, where we bring it into a community where people can kind of look and see what's going on, learn from other people's comments. You can stay in the background if you want and watch what's happening, or you can jump right in and ask the questions that you want. So what we're trying to encourage, I suppose, with 30 years of dealing with people coming to me at the end of their working lives and having financial questions that they've never had an answer to, I felt that if somebody can kind of get an answer somewhere along in between, they'll make a huge difference to their financial wellness overall.
Okay. And listen, just before we go to the guys, this podcast is going out to the HR community across Ireland itself. And you're each week you're going to tell HR people in terms of giving advice or guidance, if you like, on financial issues, the steps you think they should look at. So what's the first bit of advice you think should be going out there to employees?
Okay, yeah. So Brenda, like each week, I hope to bring a bit of a theme, which I kind of try to bring across into the theme with the HR people as well themselves. So we'd say the podcast theme today is, what do you do to help your employees understand where they are today? So how do you help them understand and assess their current status or progress? So for instance, in my domain, which is financial coaching, I call this knowing your money. And to me, knowing your money is all about knowing where you are financially today. So to help employees know their money, I do what I call the 7-day financial base camp challenge. Mm-hmm. So this exercise forms the foundation for them to plan their financial lives into the future. So what I'd be really interested in from the panel today is to understand how they help employees understand their current status in their company.
Okay, great. Listen, that's a great segue for me to go directly to the panel. And I'll start with Eoin. Listen, before we get into anything, Eoin, tell us about yourself, your journey maybe into learning and development, and then tell us about the Emerald Contact Center.
Sure, thanks, Brendan. So I suppose my own journey is a strange one. Actually, started 20 years ago, nearly to the day. I started out in a contact center in Waterford, and after a time doing that, I moved into management with respect to sales. And at the time, there was quite a growth going on within the organization. There was a pretty aggressive ramp going on, which meant that the learning and development resource within that business at the time was pretty chock-a-block. And so I had lended my hand. I'd said, okay, well, look, I'll certainly, I'll lend a hand and jumped in. And that was my first real introduction into the L&D sphere in any way. I'm not sure what it says about me as a manager to say that I wasn't asked back. But I'm about 15 years now, all in all, really, in learning and development. I love it. Like, to be quite honest, it's a passion. It's always been a passion. I was incredibly lucky to land on my feet. And I've made a life out of it, really. I've done some consultancy work, and I find myself now in an incredible company that I've been in for the last 5 years. And I'm we'll be talking about the ins and outs of the expectation setting and keeping employees engaged, which which would be great. But very much, like, as I say, very, very much a passion of mine. And I've always said to people, I think that the thing I love most about learning and development is that there are things about learning and development that I just fundamentally can't stand. And I think that that's what keeps the passion. I can't stand that there's these old tropes that kind of get used quite an awful lot in the learning and development world, or that notion that archaic notion, should I say, that we can put somebody in a room tell them to sit down, be quiet, and slide 23 of 64 comes up on screen. Like, I think now in the 21st century, we're at a point where we all appreciate that there's little to any value in any of that, and that learning and development in and of itself is an experiential process more than a theory-based process. And you know, I feel that things are starting to change in the L&D sphere, and you know, I very much want to be a part of that. But I think fundamentally, what I love and what I see as my role being in this organization. Look, once upon a time, Brendan, somebody took a chance on me. Once upon a time, I was a customer-facing employee doing a job, and somebody, my manager, somebody looked at me and said, "Let's give this guy a chance." And like, that was it. That was the start of my career, and that chance that I was given led me to places like India, you know, in the Philippines, and all of that beautiful stuff. And I really see that my goal within my current organization, and my team's goal at that globally, is to afford other people the opportunities that were afforded us at one point in time. So you know, I'm very interested to take part in this conversation.
Yeah. Listen, I can really get your passion there, and I'll be asking you in a few minutes in terms of how COVID affected it and all of that.
Sure, of course.
But let's hear from Gillian now. Gillian, you're the country executive at 30% Club Ireland. Again, tell us about yourself, and tell us about 30% Club Ireland and your journey towards all of that.
Thanks, Brendan. I feel at a disadvantage having listened to passion and expertise before now. I wish I was really good at sports metaphors, but as we go through this, you'll discover sport is not my thing. But I have a life of two halves. So the first half I tend to describe as being a woman in a world of 7.5 billion people, where 51% are female. So I count myself in the majority. I have lived all my life in Ireland, where more than 50% of college graduates are girls. So I have the benefit of being really well educated. I spent a lot of my time as an executive in financial services, again, where 56%, I think, are female. So again, a majority. And over my career, I moved more and more into the minority. So I retired 2 years ago, having spent 40 years in the one organization as a senior executive, where less than 25% of executives were women. And I also built a career in a world where the idea was that to be a successful woman, you either had to be single or childless or have a working husband who stayed and ran your home for you. And I was happily married with kids, and a husband who had a dual career the same way as I did. And somehow we managed to raise 2 kids to adulthood without screwing up their lives. So I had 40 years of moving from being the norm and the majority into the minority. So as part of my retirement, I decided to do something different. So I now have a second encore career, very much a portfolio career. So I serve on a number of boards. I chair a board, which again is quite rare for women in Ireland. I work with companies, helping them on their people journey, because my previous employer, we had 10,000 employees. I've worked on some amazing projects and learned a lot along the way. And I also have the great privilege to run the 30% Club in Ireland. So for listeners who haven't heard of us, 30% Club is a global campaign supported by chairs and CEOs of medium to large organizations who are committed to changing gender balance at the top of their organization, not just because it's the right thing to do, but because it makes sound business sense in terms of talent attraction, talent retention, customer outcomes, and stakeholder outcomes. So as I said, the first half of my life was all with one company. Second half of my life is doing lots of different things every day and talking about things that I'm passionate about. I have done learning and development. I have done HR strategy. I even delved into pensions and financial literacy for a little while. So a lot of what Mark says makes sense. But mostly I talk about what I've learned along the way and work with companies on their journey for a workplace that's very different to the workplace that I started in.
Brilliant, brilliant. Gillian, thanks very much. So yeah, you're not short of the passion either, and loads of experience there. Let me just throw out a couple of questions to both our panelists, and I might come back then to Mark for a couple of other things. Over to you, Eoin, first. COVID, did it give a whole new set of challenges to learning and development and HR, do you think?
Oh, I mean, without a shadow of a doubt, 100%. I mean, I remember at the outset, before the government had made that initial announcement that the country itself was going to be going into lockdown. You know, we had anticipated, and you could tell the way the wind was blowing, I think, by watching the news reports nearly every day. I think the organization itself is blessed, but we had a director at the time, Eoin Prendergast would have been the director, or is the director of the operation in Emerald. And to be fair, Eoin got the team together. She got the learning and development team together, the IT team together, and probably set one of the most compelling goals that I've ever been a part of, which is, we need to get people home. We need to get an understanding as to who we can get home in terms of like equipment and technology that they have in their own houses, and we need to get it done before the end of the week. And you know, I think it was the IT person then at that time had said, for every box we get out the door, it's a person that gets to keep a job. You know what I mean? And you'll never get more of a compelling goal than that. And I think everybody kind of rode in behind it, and there was some laser focus that was there. But to the wider question, Brendan, like it had an immediate impact on learning and development. Traditionally speaking, learning and development, for the most part, you know, is a face-to-face type of a setting. So in terms of Emerald, what we had to do very, very quickly was we had to move our entire platform online effectively and you know, remotely. And you're having to do all of that without compromising what it is that you stand for as an organization, because you don't get to say that you're a communications business if the first thing you throw out the window in an emergency setting is the manner in which and the frequency with which you communicate. And so, you know, the greatest challenge I think that we had there was, how do we maintain that? If we say that these are fundamental components of our culture, and we mean these things, then what are we going to do to maintain that? So to be fair, I think, you know, the trainers themselves, the learning and development team, very much got on board. There was quite a lot of content that needed to be rewritten for a more remote audience. Simple things like right down to the very day-to-day, moment-to-moment type of pieces fundamentally changed. You know, in traditionally, if you have a candidate in a classroom who, for whatever reason, may not get the content or understand it, it can sometimes be a very simple and thoughtless thing for a trainer to do at the front of the room, to come down and work with them. Now, obviously, in today's world, let alone the world that was a year and a half ago, you just can't do that anymore. And so you have to come up with better strategies to engage your audience. And I think what it's done, I think what this whole pandemic has done in terms of our organization and the entirety of the organization, is it's made us become much more honest with our employees. Every business worth its salt has a mission statement or a value statement. Every single business has it. But I genuinely believe that there are a difference between those businesses that have it and those businesses that live it. And I unfortunately think that there are too few businesses that live it, which is probably why they stand out in the marketplace. And you know, add into the mix also, we have an entirely different audience that are kind of coming to the fore now, with different expectations in terms of what their employers should be fulfilling for them. You know, we've got people coming into an organization now that are looking for a career, not necessarily within contact centers, but they're looking for a springboard into their career. Because whereas we have people coming with paper now, they may not be coming with experience. And so, you know, front-facing organizations like our own in the contact center world, you know, still has a place for that in terms of people's career development. You want to be a great trainer, you start off in a contact center. You'll have no better experience with the volume of classes, or the volume of opportunities, and the volume of projects that come through. And I think if you can stand the test of time there, you know, you go into that world in a better place, so to speak, you know. But we certainly had our challenges, and still do. But I think, you know, to be fair, at every step of the way, it's been a consultative effort across the board. What's always been key, and you know, Emer would speak to this much better than I could, but what would always be key is you know, you can never go into a siloed mentality, which unfortunately, like a black hole, is the easiest thing to fall into, you know, in a setting like this. So we always had to be mindful that there was a synchronicity to the onboarding of new candidates coming through the operations, to you know, the communication and who did what, and ensuring that every step along the way, that it was our front facing, it was the agents were the ones that got everybody's time when they required it, you know. And I think the fact that we've maintained, if not even pushed on with some of our core metrics, is an indicator that, you know, not only were we able to keep some of those fundamentals, but really then, you know, take some chances, you know, in terms of L&D, to really take some chances, to push the bar just a little bit. It doesn't always work, but you can see that in the immediacy of the results. But I think that's what makes us much more of a solid unit, is we will absolutely take those chances. And our agents and those people that are in those classrooms know that we're taking those chances, and they're on board, and they're willing to push that 2% more than what we might have expected in the past. Because, you know, our clients, let's face it, that the expectations of our clients is that, you know, service is maintained, customers get dealt with, you know, and those are our agreements, and those are our responsibilities.
And I imagine, Eoin, that it's a highly pressurized environment, isn't it? And it can put a lot of stress on your employees. So I do imagine, and you've seen it probably over the course of the years, that there's more of an emphasis now on, okay, how can we help our employees to manage
100%.
stress, you know?
100%.
Yeah. And how have you seen the changes in over the years in terms of how people look at their employees, not just as coming in 9 to 5 or whatever hours, but people with fuller lives than that?
Yeah, well, but I think even just from the work perspective, even though, like, what we demand of employees now, and this isn't just contact centers, we expect them to do so much more now than we would have expected them to do 10 years ago. And so it's insane for us not to challenge our own processes, for us not to challenge our own fundamentals or our own stereotypes, when we expect other people to be doing more than they might have been doing before, and to expect ourselves that shouldn't fall back on us. I mean, that's a misnomer. That's a fallacy. So I think, to be honest with you, first and foremost, we need to get an understanding of what we have to do right from the outset with respect to any new employees coming in the door, let alone tenured employees, is to figure out why it is that they're there. I mean, and that's it, like, what it is that brings you in. I'm not naive enough to believe that everybody that walks through the door is going to be the person that says that they want a career doing what I do or otherwise. And I'm not naive enough to believe that, of course not. However, like I say, many people use contact centers as a stepping stone. I'm completely fine with that, by the way. If we can get the best out of you over a period of years, and then you springboard into what you want to do, more capable as a result of what you've given us, then that's a win-win relationship. And I think outright, that's what it has to be. We're all about expectations, because how can any of us expect anybody to do anything to any level unless we are clear in how we define our expectations of people. But before I can define what my expectations are of you, Brendan, I think it's always important that we ask our audiences what they expect of us first, whether that be in terms of their career, whether that be in terms of the support that they believe that they need. And I think that's the fundamental part of that psychological contract that happens at the very front door, you know.
Very, very interesting. Gillian, let me ask you a question in relation to what your huge focus is with gender balance, really, isn't it? Have you seen over the years different pressures between male and female task force and how they're dealt with? Any thinking on that line?
In what sense, Brendan?
In terms of the employees themselves, do you notice different types of stresses maybe for female employees versus male employees, and maybe different attitudes towards helping female employees or helping male employees? Maybe there's not, I'm no expert on that line, but maybe you've seen something there, have you?
I think probably what we have started to see, and I might link some of this back to what we've experienced in the last year and a half, is probably a change in perceptions and a change in bias. And a lot of the work that we have done across the 30% club members is to try and understand the motivations that are in the workforce and are in the workplace, and how does that drive good employers to think about how they make the work relationship more effective and more productive for both sides. And I think there was always a misconception that women wanted certain types of things in terms of employment, and men wanted certain types of things from employment, and they were quite different. And actually, what we see as we have the conversations is that the modern workforce, men and women are very similar in terms of the types of things that they want. They want inclusion, they want control over their life in some ways, and they also want to be able to be themselves and not fit into a particular stereotype. So when we have a look at the research, we see that agile working, and I'll talk about agile as quite different to remote working, but agile working is just as important to men as it is to women. Being safe to take family absences is just as important to men as it is to women. Getting on a career ladder is just as important to women as it is to men. And we're moving more and more towards a situation where it's less thinking about what kind of policies do we need for the men in our organization and for the women in our organization, but more about what makes us a better workplace and what can we do to take away some of those barriers that are there, whether they're real or perceived, in terms of stopping either group or both groups progressing to what they want to be. You know, I like some of Eoin's examples that he had earlier, where we talk about learning and development and leadership. And it's not about, you know, being the leader that's on slide 23 in the online course. It's about different characteristics that make great leaders. And some of those characteristics are a bit more female. Some of them are a bit more masculine. And actually, it's fine for male leaders to display both, and for female leaders to display both, and both of them have their need. I do tend to talk about, you know, what's happening in the world of work, and a little bit about what's happening in COVID, as a bit of an evolution. So like if my dad was here and I was having a conversation with my dad, which I did do as a HR person because he could never understand, you know, what I did. You know, he came from a generation where the majority of employees went to work to fund their life. They clocked in, did their work, get paid, go home. And engagement and happiness and fulfillment came totally from life outside work. Then there was probably my generation where we started to talk much more about work-life balance. And how did we make sure that neither got in the way of each other? And from a HR perspective, you know, for my dad's generation, it was all about pay and superannuation. For my generation, it began to be, you know, conversations around terms and conditions and policies. And now if I look at the current generation, we don't talk about work-life balance anymore. We talk about work-life blend. And from a HR perspective, it's less now about policies and terms and conditions. They're the factors that if you don't have them as an employer, you just don't get people. The differentiation is more in engagement, how we treat people, and a sense of self-worth. And I see the last year and a half as not separate to that evolution, but more a tipping point where there's a chance to do something differently. So if I give an example, and you can tell me to pause if I'm talking for too long, but the last big project that I did in my previous life was to move nearly 5,000 people to agile working. So we got rid of offices, we did hot desking, we changed everything that we did in terms of remote access. And there were a number of senior leaders who came to me as the HR lead on the project and said, Gillian, this is never going to work. I can't see what people are doing. Not every job can be done remotely. And most of my time was less working with the property people who were going, you know, just take away a desk and an office and people's lives change, to more about, for a modern workforce, we need to think about agile working in different ways. So yes, it is about place. Yes, it is about how work gets done in terms of workflow, but it's also about a different leadership mindset. And that's what we need in terms of modern leaders. And I think for us, the pandemic was the brilliant test. So I had spent 3 years helping 5,000 people move to a more, you know, modern type of work. And in the first 3 months of COVID, I had hundreds of people mailing me going, we didn't think this was possible, but you were so right. And thank God we had done this, because, you know, we all knew how to work remotely. But what we did discover is that for a leader in a new world, whether you're looking after masculine teams or feminine teams or diverse, inclusive teams, which is what we want, is that it is about trust. It is about outcomes. And it's also about recognizing that today, as an employers, work is not about where we go. It's about what we do, and the relationships become important. So yes, the pandemic has had huge challenges. There's lots of media coverage to say women did not survive the pandemic from a work perspective quite as well as men did. But actually, there are lots of positives that came out of it. Companies that were already set up for a more agile type of work, they adjusted much quicker. Leaders that adopt a more inclusive type of leadership survived much better when you had to focus on trust and outcomes to measure activity as opposed to inputs and daily supervision. So it's a journey that now is a good opportunity to see where it can go next.
Definitely, definitely. And just before I go back to Mark, a question for Eoin to round it off from his side. The workforce nowadays, as Gillian has been saying, there's a huge change. There's an evolution in terms of the expectations of our fathers and grandfathers' generations to what people are looking for now. Do you find, Eoin, that employees now are looking for the added extras? How can you make, maybe it's gym membership, maybe it's I don't know, information about fitness and health, something that gives them something extra from other workplaces that are just all about pressure and work?
No, I certainly think that there is a truth to that, Brendan. Yes, absolutely. I think, and I think that's evidenced by even some of the things that you're currently seeing going on in the States at the minute there, in terms of their recruitment issues that they're having and what they're doing, you know, some of the things that they're doing to some of the things that they're doing to address it really, and to bring in new candidates. So I think it has its place, but do I think it's the be all and end all? I don't necessarily think it's the unique selling point of organizations. I think it's great that organizations can have those and invest culturally in that sort of an environment for people. But again, and I know I keep coming back to this, if you don't have the fundamentals right in your organization, whether they be the communication channels, the development channels, whatever the case may be, the support that's there, then it doesn't matter what uniqueness you have as a business in terms of your offering for, to redress the balance. People will still leave, and I think that's what people, and I think Gillian really hit the nail on the head there. I mean, what people really, really want at this moment in time, and you know what, I've probably always wanted it, is a sense of autonomy in the role that they do, regardless of what that role is. Being able, I suppose, like a relatedness in the work that they're doing. Do you know what I mean? Like, you can't, people would find, as we all know, people find it very difficult or next to impossible to do something that they're just morally against, whether it's a job or otherwise, to do. So there has to be a relatedness there. And ultimately then, for anybody to thrive in a working environment, then there has to be an element of, we have to look at that competency piece, and how do we keep coming back to that? It's a very difficult thing, and unfortunately an easy trap for a business to fall into, whereby the only thing you ever find yourself doing is talking to people about, you know, how far away they are from their goals, or what they did wrong. They went left here when they should have gone right, and we become incredibly articulate. And contact centers especially so. I mean, we can see to the second what people are doing with time whereby they're not being productive or talking to a customer. And the danger there is with poor leadership in any organization is that you become very articulate about what failure looks like. And I think traditionally that's where we've been as businesses, and I'll speak to only my own sector then. So contact centers, I think that's where we've been stuck for quite some time. And I think that's why a lot of the stereotypes, you know, around kind of the type of work people do in contact centers, that's why they manifest, because we don't put enough on, I suppose, how we deal with our own people. And it's incumbent upon us to be as articulate about describing success as it is about describing failure. And weirdly enough, we find it more difficult to talk about success than we do failure. So I think, yes, you know, having the additional pieces, I think, yeah, that, you know, they are fastly becoming a requirement of an organization as opposed to an add-on or a nice to have. But you know, without that basic component or that basic mix, it doesn't matter what you're going to offer. You're not going to impact your attrition.
Thanks very much, Eoin. Let me go now, lastly, to you, Mark, again, for what you've heard from Gillian and Eoin. The very, very passionate, but very insightful. I think a lot of wisdom there as well.
Yes.
What would you pick up from those conversations there?
First of all, to Gillian and Eoin, that was like a master class for me in all these areas. It's so interesting to hear your insights into the way you work with your people and stuff like that. But I suppose a couple of things that came out to me there, I said, Eoin, at the start, you said passion. And I think passion, no matter what you do, whether it's at work or how you live your life, these are important. And I suppose that's what we're all trying to do as employers, is try to engage some bit of passion with our employees. And another thing, Eoin, you were talking about was experiential learning. And it's a term I hear more and more, and I'm really interested in how that can develop in time, because I do agree with you, standing in front of somebody, running through a presentation, nobody learns from that. And I think the experience of gaining more and more knowledge, whether it's coaching or whatever way you do that, this is something we have to kind of learn an awful lot more. And I think especially the area where you said, you know, have it and do it, you know, your mission statement, there's two different things, just having it and putting it up on the wall and it means nothing. I think that's where all of us as employers are having to start to sit down and say, what is it we can do? You know, what are we saying we're doing, and are we doing it properly, and things like that. And then Gillian, then especially your statement about trust and outcomes, very important. I mean, I know even just in my own organization here in the last 6-7 months, I've been trying to understand how I actually work with people when they're remote, and coming from a traditional style of working in an office, it was very hard for me to understand the trust factor. But in some cases, I've seen the performance improve, and it was amazing for me. And as you said, it's more about outcomes, not about being in an office from 9 to 5. So I think these are all transformations that employers are trying to make, whether it's a small employer or a large multinational. And I think everything is about a journey, whether it's a financial journey or a journey through your life. And I suppose one just thing that I'd be interested in as well is that whether it's, I suppose people want variation in their career and they want flexibility. And I suppose, how does the financial effect of that help them? You know, I suppose you have to be financially in a good place to have flexibility. And I suppose that's where I'm coming from in my very small area of the whole area of helping employees. It's to get them to a point where they can understand, yeah, I'm okay financially. Maybe I can take that career break, or maybe I can take that time off and things like that. So it's to get that understanding and knowledge into the workspace like that. So I must say, I learned a huge amount there today from both Eoin and Gillian, and it really made it kind of clear to me that there's a new way that's evolving for the last 18 months, and it's really, really interesting.
Well, listen, that's I'd echo your sentiments on that, definitely, Mark. And that's I think where we'll leave it today. I want to thank Eoin McCoy. He's Global Head of Learning and Development at Emerald Contact Centre, and Gillian Harford, Country Executive at 30% Club Ireland. And Mark Corkery, who is our resident special guest on the panel from Premier Life. Thank you all, and I'll join you again at the next episode. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you.